and we'll see if anybody can go back further than that. But in 1995, I was a between high school senior and college freshman in the summer of 95. Earlier that spring, I had taken a bus trip to a school called Mansfield University, which is in north central Pennsylvania. It's a predominantly white school. And it was a combination bus trip, a minority bus trip, and football recruiting trip. And so, to give you some context on the demographics of the school, my sophomore year, my first semester of sophomore year, we had a party when we reached 100 African Americans on campus. So that's how not diverse the college was. But on that bus trip, I met a girl, and when we came back from the bus trip and throughout the spring and early summer, we talked, and finally I convinced this poor woman to go on a date with me. And so we're all set. And if you're from the 90s, I'm a product and child of the 90s, you know, my outfit had to be fly. So had a fresh white t-shirt, fresh out the Hanes bag, white jean shorts pressed with the seam, you know, the what's it called when you do the iron the crease. I had the fresh crease in the front, had the white tube socks, and of course the shell tops, the mid-level shell top Adidas. And so living in South Philly, and a shout out to anybody who's from Philly, I'm standing at 16th and Christian in South Philly waiting for the 2 bus to take the bus downtown to meet at the clothespin. And shout out to anybody who knows what I'm talking about, the clothespin. And so standing there waiting on the corner for the bus, and up pulls his car, screeching his tires, almost slamming into me at the corner. And out pops these 2 guys. When I first see them pop out the car, plain clothes, just like me and you, but I see badges hanging around their neck. They grip me up, throw me up against the car, handcuff me, throw me in the back seat, drive me about 4 or 5 blocks, pop out at around 19th and Christian, and pull me out of the car, stand me on the curb, and screams, "Is this him? Is this him?" The lady says to the cops, and I couldn't tell you what the lady looked like today because it was such a blur. It was like a 5-minute blur, but I could tell you the words that she said like it was yesterday. She said, "What's wrong with you? I told you he was in gray sweats and a blue t-shirt." They threw me back in the back of the car, took me back to 16th and Christian, dropped me out, took the handcuffs off, and then went on their merry way. I did find out later what they were looking for was the guy who raped a kid. The problem with that is clearly I just described an outfit that was all white because I was trying to be fresh for my first date. So now I have a dingy white outfit. And so I missed my bus because back then I was late for everything, but I've sort of kind of changed that today. Take the bus back down to the clothespin because it was too late to change my outfit. Get down there, meet the young lady, and I tell her the story of what happened. And strangely enough, she understood. It was that understandable for me to be just scooped up on the corner back then for what I call the look the part look in South Philly. And so that's my story. You know, you can wear all white, not fit the description of the actual perp, but because I was standing on the corner, was scooped up just like any other person who actually did something wrong. And one more thing I want to add about that, the type of person I am, I'm kind of laid back, kind of chill, relaxed, if people know me long enough. And so one thing I'll say, you know, there were no cameras back then. There were no mobile phones with videos to record it. There was no crowd of people. There was, you know, no hashtags or nothing like that. But I could have been one if I was more resistant, if I had tensed up, or if I'd said, wait, what's going on? Just by the way things are kind of today. You know, if you don't comply, you might die, right? That's kind of the way it goes. And so I think part of the reason I'm sitting here telling the story is because the person I am, I'm kind of just more observant, more reserved, as opposed to somebody who's done nothing wrong. Their natural response would be, wait, what are you doing? Why are you touching me? You know, hands go up. You're not throwing your hands behind your back. And so a lot of times you hear people, you should just sort of comply. And that day I did. And I'm not saying that should be the case every time, but I think I was lucky as opposed to what was the norm, or what kind of is the norm. So that's my story.
Thank you for sharing that. You know, I know that there's going to be, as we go through tonight and we have discussions with our panelists, I'm convinced that they will address, that we'll be able to probably speak to some of that. But again, I want to say I'm glad that you're sitting with us tonight.
If I can say one more thing real quick.
Sure.
We didn't last much longer than that period.
Oh, so it didn't.
Yeah, it didn't work out.
I'm sorry it didn't work out. I'm sorry. Maybe you should have had a different outfit. Brother Dwayne Lewis.
Thank you, Brother Ray. Greetings, brothers of the wondrous band of Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated. My story that I want to share, and thank you for the opportunity to share, dates back to around 2006. And my uncle and I, we were traveling to Tampa, Florida from North Carolina to visit my sister and the rest of my family for Thanksgiving weekend. And so my uncle and I, we rented a Montero, if you all remember the Montero Sport utility vehicles, we rented that. At that time, probably neither one of our cars would have made it to Tampa. So we rented a Montero Sport. And around that time, I was around 37 and my uncle was 38. And so he was driving and I was asleep in the passenger side of the car. And he woke me up probably around, we were in Savannah, Georgia. And he said, wake up, man. I said, what's up? He said, I've been stopped by the police. So I sit up in the car and I look in the passenger side mirror and I see two state troopers with Confederate flag signs on the front of their vehicles. I said, man, two state troopers, what did you do? And he said, I don't know, I didn't do anything. So one of the state troopers came over to his side of the vehicle and asked him for his license. And he complied. The other state trooper came on my side of the vehicle. I rolled the window down and he asked me, where were we headed? I said, we're going to Tampa, Florida for Thanksgiving to meet our family. His next question was, do we have any drugs or weapons in the vehicle? And I said, sir, we don't do drugs and we don't have any weapons on us. And I had to think about that moment because my dad always taught me when I started driving at 16, what to do when you're stopped by the police. You know, make sure that you're respectful, make sure that you do what they ask you to do so that you can, you know, go on about your day. The next question he asked me was, what do we do for a living? And at that time, I was a school social worker in Greensboro, and my uncle was a bank manager. And I told him what we did as a profession. His next question was, can we search your vehicle? Do you mind if we search your vehicle? And so I thought about it again, and I started to say, no, you cannot. But being in Savannah, Georgia, there were Confederate flags on the front of these state troopers' cars. I said, yes, you can. I know we didn't have anything on us. He asked me to step out of the vehicle, and I went to the back of the utility truck, opened the vehicle for him, and that's when he began to proceed to search our luggage, our duffel bags, and just go through our things. Again, after he didn't find anything, I thought it was done and over with. He went to his car and came back with a long metal rod, and I'm not sure what the technical name of it is, but he began to go down the paneling of the doors on my side of the vehicle. And that moment I said, wow, he thinks we really have drugs on us. And so after he did not find anything in the vehicle, he asked me to go ahead and take a seat back in the vehicle. And I did. And then we waited patiently. And then one of the officers came back to my uncle's side of the driver's side and gave him his license back and gave him a speeding ticket going 5 miles over the speeding limit. Told us to slow down and have a good day. And so in that moment, I've always read about articles of African-American males being racially profiled. And me and my uncle, we drove away, and this was on the side of Interstate 95 going through Savannah, Georgia. And we were silent for probably 10 miles. Neither one of us said a word. But I was steaming, I was hot, I was frustrated that being an educator in Greensboro, North Carolina, and all the things that I do as an advocate to help others, I was treated as a criminal, as if I had some drugs in our possession. And so we never told our family that we were stopped. But as I think about all the incidents that are happening now and that have been happening, if I made the wrong move outside of that vehicle, could I have been shot by that police officer? And not knowing, it had been their word against our word on what happened. And so I'm thankful that I lived through that experience. Having worked closely with Sigma Betas in Greensboro at our graduate chapter, Gamma Beta Sigma in Greensboro, we often talk to youth about living through the experience when you get stopped by the police. And so I was able to live through that experience. But as you know, and we all know, some and many are not as fortunate as we have, Brother Ewing and I have just discussed. So Brother Ray, that's my story. And again, thank you for the opportunity to share with the brothers and our guests.
Thank you, Brother Lewis. And, I'm looking forward to discussion tonight from some of our panelists, especially our police chiefs, that, I'm hoping will share with us how to be able to live through the experience. And because I think that's critical, and that's an important statement that was made. Our last brother tonight, Brother Dale Thomas.
All right, good evening, everyone. So my story starts, pretty similarly to everybody else's. My story goes back to 2000. I was a senior in high school, and my two best friends and my brother were coming home from a basketball game. And we live in a suburb of Raleigh, North Carolina called Cary, which is predominantly white, but is consistently ranked in top 10 places in the country to live. Kind of one of those Mayberry towns where, it's just nice manicured lawns and nice houses. And so we're headed home after a basketball game, and we are maybe 2-3 miles away from home, and we see blue lights in the background. So, not thinking anything, we pull over. Two officers come up to the passenger side and the driver's side window and just ask us, where we're headed. And we tell them, calmly, we're headed home from a basketball game, a high school basketball game. And they proceed to tell us that one of the taillights is out. And so they asked, were we aware of the taillight being out? And my friend, being the driver, he stated no. It was an old 1980 something Cutlass Supreme that his grandfather had gifted to him. And so the officer's like, okay, he takes his driver's license, he goes and runs his information. So we're thinking, okay, it's a routine stop. They might give him a ticket for the taillight, or they might just let us go. So minutes later, they come back to the vehicle, and the ashtray was open, and there were a few loose dollars in the ashtray. So the officers are like, whose money is that? And, my friend was like, oh, it's my money. It's just a few dollars. And so they kind of huddle up and kind of talk for a couple minutes, and they come back and they're like, can we search the car? Me being the person that I am, I'm pretty laid back, but I also, I don't deal with injustice or being disrespected very well. I'm in the back seat whispering to my best friend, don't consent, because I knew what was coming. I was like, don't allow him to do it. Don't allow him to do it. And they, they're asking, can we search the car? He, knowing that we hadn't done anything wrong and that we didn't have anything in the car, he agreed to exit the vehicle and let them search the car. So we exit the vehicle, and we get out of the car, and I'm at this point upset because, for an out tail light and nothing else suspicious, like, why are we out of this car? They then asked us to go sit on the curb, which we all start to walk over to the curb. On our way to the curb, the officers start to pat down each of us without even saying anything like, we're going to, search you to make sure for our safety or anything like that. It just was kind of an automatic. They just started, patting us down. So my friends complied, and I was the one, looking back, that probably would have been on the news, because I looked the one officer in the eyes and I said, don't touch me, because I knew what he was doing wasn't right, and I knew we hadn't done anything wrong, and that, this was all bogus. He looked back at me, and I don't know, maybe God was on my side that night, but he told me, just go sit down. He didn't touch me. So we're sitting on the side of the road. They go through the car. Of course, they find nothing. My best friend's mom is a nurse, and so she had her some of her nursing equipment in the back seat and a stethoscope in the back seat. And so they pull her little bag out of the car, and they're like, which one of you is the doctor? And, we're all high school kids. So, like, come on, man, like what, what's going on here? Needless to say, they found nothing. We were able to get back into the vehicle and go home. It's one of those things where I feel like up until that point in life, you go along. I come from a family where my grandfather was in law enforcement. My uncle's in law enforcement. My great aunt was a lieutenant in law enforcement back home in the Virgin Islands. And I'd always looked at police officers with respect and, kind of being those model citizens that do right and are here to protect you. But a piece of me was taken that night, a piece of innocence. And after that night, I would have panic attacks when I saw police officers driving by. So my stepfather actually after that incident, because of the panic attacks that I was having, he gave me a radar detector that he had so that I'd get a little advance notice when I was driving that a cop was coming close to me. So it was very traumatic to say the least as a senior in high school, you know, to experience that and to have to go through that. And my friend's dad, actually, he was very active in the community. So he put together a little panel for us, and we had a meeting with all the chiefs of police in the county, and all the chiefs of police did come, and we told them the story, and we ended up getting, you know, a written apology from the Cary police after that incident. But it was one that, you know, I don't take lightly and has traveled with me, and is one of the reasons why I honestly chose to go into the field that I am and that I'm in and become an attorney. So yeah, that's my story.
Brother Thomas, thank you so much for that, and that was amazing. You know, I know that there are many of us that have many stories, and I know that if we open it up, we'll be here all night. But I thought it was important that we at least highlight some individuals understanding, you know what this discussion is about. But it's not only just about the stories of what has been endured by some of us, but it's also about us trying to talk about what are the next steps. What do we do when marching is over with? What do we do when we can, when all the protest is over, and looking to see what the next levels are. So thank you all for that. Now it's time for us to get to our panelists. Tonight we're joined by a cross section of leaders in law enforcement, in government, and the nonprofit sector. We have a pretty big panel tonight, and the goal is to make sure that our audience of listeners hear from all of you. As you all know, not only are you speaking to members of Phi Beta Sigma, but we've also invited the general public as well. And so we're very fortunate for that. So can each of you take about 30 seconds to introduce yourselves, tell us your current position and what you hope the listeners take away from the town hall discussion this evening. And because I'm the moderator and I can do this, we're going to start, of course, with the sole lady who has joined us this evening, Tammy Gordon. Sora Gordon.
Thank you, Brother Ray. Good evening, all the panelists and all of the listeners out there. So my name is Tamara Manning Gordon, and I am currently the first vice president of Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated. And one thing I also hold true is I'm also the mother of a 16-year-old African-American son, which is one of my most proudest moments. My impact and what I would like for us to talk about this evening, I'd like for us to have the real heart-to-heart conversation and to get to the elephant in the room. I know oftentimes we have peers and we have colleagues in various sectors, and we have the surface level conversations, which is one of the reasons why I think we revisit this. And when something happened in the case of Brother Floyd or Eric Garner or any of those young men, we are upset for a while and we are enraged, and then it's like business as usual. So I would like for us to dig deep and hold each other accountable and hold everyone else accountable, our peers, our friends, our foes, our colleagues, our administrators, our law enforcement, and everyone else, because it's going to take a serious heart-to-heart dialogue for each of us for anything to change. So thank you for having me this evening, and I look forward to engaging with you all.
Thank you so much. We're just going to go in alphabetical order because I'm a military guy and order is always important. So we're going to start with Chief Ballard.
Good evening. Thank you, Brother Ray. I very much appreciate the opportunity. Thank you to Phi Beta Sigma. My name is Mark Ballard. I have the pleasure of serving as Chief of Police of Starkville, Mississippi. What I would like for everybody to take from this meeting is to recognize, one, I represent law enforcement at a small town level and at probably a suburban level. And with that, that's the majority of law enforcement. And I absolutely believe that most of law enforcement, like any other profession, consists of good men and women. But it is absolutely a profession that is struggling. It is one that warrants reform. And I'm an advocate for leadership development, for raising the standards for accountability and for a very real talk of retention and recruiting and what we can do as a professional industry to truly raise our standards to meet an equal setting with that of the medical profession, that of a university professors, something that is distinguished and professional and carries with it respect. And so again, I welcome the heart-to-heart discussion, and I'm very thankful to be on this format with very distinguished men and women. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chief Ballard. Attorney Barnes.
Thank you, Brother Ray, and good evening to my fellow panelists and to our brothers and to our guests. My name is Kennedy Barnes. I am a practicing attorney. I happen to also be the elected International General Counsel of Phi Beta Sigma. I grew up mostly in the city, but I studied hard, and I thought, we were told by our parents, by our grandparents, and by all the members of our community that if you studied and you worked hard, that everything would be okay. And I remember I've been stopped by the police countless times, and I've actually had 3 occasions where police have stopped and pulled weapons. And the first time was that I was a student at the University of Chicago Law School, one of the best law schools, supposedly one of the best law schools in the country. And it was finals. And my car, I had a raggedy Ford Escort that broke down during the day. I had it parked in the back lot behind the law school. 60th and 61st. 60th was the University of Chicago campus. 61st is the Hill. And so the library closed at midnight, and I wanted to get all the studying in. And so I decided that we would move my car from the lot because the 61st Street is almost guaranteed that, pretty good chance it's going to get. And I remember pushing the car, me and 2 of my classmates, both of whom were African-American like myself, pushing my raggedy car to the front of the building. And I remember seeing University of Chicago police pass by several times. No one stopped to ask, can I help you? Or do you need a tow truck or anything like that? And then all of a sudden there were like 5 cars that pulled up. And that was the first time that we had weapons pulled. What are you doing? Where are you going? And we had to explain that. And that was the first time. And even as a professional man, when I moved to Dallas, there was still profiling. And so the point is, I think we all know this already. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter how much money you have, how much education you have. Anything can happen. And so what I'd like to take from this tonight, what I'm listening for is, where do we go from here? This is a turning point. This opportunity, this time in American history and in world history feels different. I believe it is different. But we're going to have policy, and we're going to have some focus after this if things are really going to change for our kids, for our grandkids. And so I'm excited about this conversation. We all are in this together, but that's how we're going to resolve and have an opportunity to improve.
Thank you so much, Brother Barnes. And let me just reiterate again, I'm going to have some flexibility with you because you are our attorney. But I would remind everyone else, 35 seconds. Just give us your name. But I yield to my attorney brother. Even though I don't agree with the Chicago School of Law. William and Mary is probably better. But we'll move on to Dr. Mike Baisley. Dr. Baisley.
Good evening. My name is Michael Baisley, and I'm the International Director of Social Action for Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity. And it's really a blessing to serve in this role in this time. This is the time of the biggest social change and social crisis in our country's history. And so it's a privilege to serve. The one thing I want to say is I'm really loving the stories, because I think that's where real change happens, is when we focus on people and where they're at. I'm a high school administrator in Compton, California, and that name Compton rings bells around the country. I've been at this school 25 years. And I was dean for about 10 of those years, dean of discipline. And so I dealt with students who had just finished fighting, parents who were enraged. And one of the big things about that is I had to really maintain that professionalism, whether I was being cussed up and down or threatened. And what I found is that as I kept that, I developed a reputation for being caring about the person, not slamming them because they were in a bad state at the moment and so forth, but really trying to help them. And so I think most police officers probably come into the job trying to work with people. And I think the more we share these stories of how it really affects people to have these encounters, that we can develop that kind of empathy and so forth to allow people to engage the police without fear and trauma and move forward. So I believe that the policy is important, but to paraphrase a philosopher, given sufficient why, one can withstand any how. And that just means if you're given purpose and understanding, the law and the other things are a matter of course.
Thank you so much, Dr. Baisley. And obviously, I have to reiterate myself again to the panelists because you all are just, you obviously want to do what you want to do. And I'm going to have to become that moderator. So I'm going to ask you to just give your name, give your title, and in 35 seconds, share with us what do you want the listeners to take away this evening. And I love you all, but I will become that guy. All right. So with that being said, we've heard from Dr. Baisley. Let's move on to Brother Collins.
So I get to be the litmus test.
Absolutely.
I'm Harold Collins from Memphis, Tennessee. I serve as the Life Members Vice President for Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated. I also serve as the Administrator and Executive Director of the Shelby County Office of Reentry. What I would like for our brothers and friends who are tuning in to this to say, one, we are not adversaries to law enforcement. This discussion is to build both of these opportunities to grow. Many times, particularly in my city, we're hearing it's an either or. You're either for the police or you're not for the police when we're having these discussions. I submit to you that we can have both. We can have candid discussions about being real men and addressing the issues that all of us have faced growing up and even today. But we can also say to the police, we want to hold you accountable because you are responsible for keeping the peace and protecting the people. And that's what I would like to get across tonight. Thank you, Brother Ray.
Thank you so much, Brother Collins. And as you see, everyone, you see what he did there? We're going to keep that going. Dwayne Crawford.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Dwayne Crawford, Executive Director for the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, NOBLE. I want to acknowledge Chief Nichols, the past Chief of Starkville, Mississippi, as well as the men of Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity, for all what you all do for our partnership with NOBLE. My hope today is we're really going to talk about what can we as citizens, individual citizens, do, the reform we want to see in both our local communities and at the state and federal level. And I will say that we as citizens hold a lot more of the influence and control in this dialogue. We'll talk more about it later this evening, but thank you for the opportunity.
All right. Yo, man, it's getting better. Oh, man. Okay. Brother Johnson, Derek Johnson.
Good. Derek Johnson, President and CEO of the NAACP. Let's get to the viewers that we actually have the power, so let's use it.
All right. All right. Chief Drain.
Good afternoon, everybody. I am glad that my fraternity is holding this and engaged in this forum. I'm the chief of the Plano Police Department in Texas, just north of Dallas, city of about 300,000. I have about 650 employees. And what I'd like to get out of this tonight is I want this body to know that me, and I can guarantee you the other chiefs on this panel, Governor George Floyd was wrong. We agree that was wrong. We agree that we have some problems in our profession. And I think that what Sarah Gordon said and Mr. Johnson said is what we need to do. We need for people to get more involved in their police department, when there is not a crisis, looking at the standards, the hiring, the training of their various police departments. That's all.
Thank you so much, Chief Drain. Chief Moore.
Good evening, everyone. And from Los Angeles, I'm the chief of LAPD. I've been so for the last couple of years. I have this is my 39th year with LAPD. What I hope tonight to get from this conversation is first to hear from various perspectives and just continue to listen and gain perspective as to what's needed in law enforcement as we move forward. LAPD is at 150th years of service, but we have many dark chapters and many dark times in which we have over-policed, we've abused our authority, we've been in the wrong, and we have a history with that we need to change. And I take this moment right now as a time in our history as a promise for further reform. And we're committed to that. I'm joined with the other chiefs that absolutely discuss the murder of George Floyd, the other instances where police violence has such a terrible impact on communities, particularly the African-American community, and instances in which officers were simply wrong. I look for legislative change and reform that allows police chiefs to make those statements and carry through with consequences on officers who commit misconduct, criminal or otherwise. It just simply stated for far too long, and particularly here in California, our hands of even discussing discipline is largely tied. So there's legislative reform that needs to happen. We need to take the frustration, we need to take the energy that are out there, we need to organize. We need to organize with proper and productive reforms in policing that's going to make for a safer community. And to each of the earlier speakers, just on behalf of just a law enforcement officer who came to this business as a 21-year-old, I'm sorry that you had the experiences you had. And I've seen policing do those type of use that abuse of discretion, that abuse of their values. And I apologize. I only assure you that our effort is not to do that. Our effort is to have a policing that's respectful, that honors individuals and sees individuals as on the same playing field, on the same level ground as everyone else in American society. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chief Moore. Chief Nichols.
Thank you, Brother First Vice. Greetings to Brother President Crystal and our First Vice President Gordon, and panelists and the general public. What I hope to, my name is, and I'm the retired chief of Starkville, Mississippi, as of December 31st, 2019. What I hoped to gain from this forum is to let everyone know that all our responsibility to make sure we have reform, and also to bridge the gap between law enforcement and the community, because as of the last few years, that gap has gotten wider. So I'm hoping that we can bridge that gap and understand it's all our responsibilities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chief Nichols. And last but certainly not least, my counterpart, my partner in crime here, Brother Norvell.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Dane Norvell II, and I am the current International Second Vice President for Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated. I hope that the listeners take away some meaningful ways to engage in effective communication to help bring about impactful change to the areas of influence. Joining conversations like these for many people usually become the beginning and the end for the drive of change. So hopefully for today, each of you will leave with some questions to take back to your respective communities so that you can pass the knowledge on.
Thank you so much. And now we're just going to get right into our questions. So now these questions were pre-selected for members of our community. Some questions are going to be for all the panelists. Some are for individuals or are going to be a group of you. I will let you know who these questions are for. And of course, in the interest of time, I'm going to ask you all to please be mindful of your responses. And let's try to keep it under a minute. And I'm going to have my timer going. And I don't want to be that panelist. I don't want to be that moderator. So we're going to jump right in. This one is going to be for our chiefs, just our chiefs. The main question is, are Black men viewed more of a threat than a white male during police encounters? Are Black males viewed more of a threat than a white male during police encounters? And we will start with, because I'm looking at my screen, so we'll just start with Chief Ballard.
Lucky to start off with a BA, right? You know, I thought long and hard about this. My initial response to that was no. I listened carefully. I spoke to officers that I serve. And I think a lot of that depends upon the culture and depends upon the officers. For me personally, you know, I viewed, and you know, this is the real talk, heart to heart, that a lot of the African American individuals that were suspects or arrested, it was, you know, them going back into a facility was not, unfortunately, was part of that systemic racism that we talked about. It wasn't a big deal because many of them had grown up, gone in and gone in and out of the prison facilities. And but with some of the white males that I'd personally experienced, it was they were transitioning to be a minority in a prison system. And for them, that was a death sentence. So the resistance kind of came across higher. But after speaking to different officers, I think a lot of that's going to be dependent upon the officers' own individual experiences with suspects and or with people in general, not just those that have committed crimes. And so that's my take on it. I know that's not a solid answer either way, but I think a lot of that is dependent upon the officers' personal experiences in which they've had to make arrest.
All right, Chief Drain.
You know, I'm sure many of you here have heard of the implicit association test, Harvard's implicit association test, which is an indication of implicit bias. There are some people who don't believe in that. I do. I think that there are officers who on the surface may not even realize that they have these. And where it comes up is when you have to make fast decisions under stress. And I think that there have been enough instances that I've seen in the media, in my own police department, where I do think that that's the case. Again, we're talking about implicit biases that these guys may not even realize may be going on. They're under stress. They got to make a quick decision. And so I think it does happen. And I think it's incumbent upon me and the other police administrators on here. We have to figure out a way to train our officers out of that. And it's going to be hard because first you got to get them to realize that it's a problem. And then second, you got to figure out some kind of researched way to make sure that you can measure that you're having an impact. So it's going to be difficult to do, but I do think it's an issue. And I think it's one that most chiefs are trying to deal with.
Chief Moore.
So thank you for the opportunity on this. Plain and simple, I do believe that there are men and women within law enforcement that because of their life experience, because of the lack of life experience, because of implicit bias that's been referenced, they make shortcuts, they make mental shortcuts, and they start putting people in buckets. That includes a black male stopped in a vehicle or versus a white male. Let's just be in that level. We have to acknowledge that and recognize that it exists. We have to also screen and identify people who come to work who lack the emotional intelligence, who lack the ability to recognize that we all have biases, we all have beliefs, and we make snap judgments of individuals based on milliseconds, and but what is key is that we not act on them, that we not use our authority or power as a police officer to then act on those because there is no basis. What we do in the Los Angeles Police Department is we provide training and guidance, we provide awareness of it, and it's not a shoving it down their throat, but it's about an acknowledgement that everyone in the room and every member of the public has biases and has implicit beliefs about others. And then lastly, how do we get through that? It's not just acknowledgement, it's the social contact. It's putting people and our people in situations with all communities. In Los Angeles, we're blessed by being multicultural and so many different representations of groups. There's not a predominant group of any race or ethnicity in Los Angeles, and awareness between officers in communities and with individuals breaks down those barriers, breaks down those perceptions and those biases, and also I believe allows officers not to become, this is a hyper-vigilant field, not to become overly focused on what they think is happening in front of them. And that gives them a false sense of comfort and also a false sense of danger. And so maintaining an evenness and an openness, and yet this is also, and I'll say every chief, I know we have the similar task. We hire people at a very young age. They've grown up in a society that has multiple biases, both in entertainment and education and healthcare and housing, and that we inherit that. And it's part of us to, A, screen those out who can't make that adjustment, who can't mature into a broader sense of awareness. And then once they're with this organization in a very corrosive environment of seeing people do the most impossible and cruel things to other individuals, that they not start making, they not become cynical, they not have a hardened heart, and that they recognize that each individual deserves dignity and respect and the rights of every American.
Thank you, Chief. And Chief Nichols.
Thank you again, Brother First Vice. Yes, but I think it's because of a lack of training and understanding of different cultures. I'll share the story with you. I got hired in police as a police officer with the Star Department in 1992. I got hired with a young man who had never interacted with African Americans. He was a good person. He just had never done it. He'd gone to private schools most of his life. So he had a lot of problems dealing with African Americans on calls. Not that he was trying to, and that goes back to what the other chiefs are saying, the implicit bias. He wasn't trying to, he just didn't have a lack, he had a lack of understanding of the Black culture. So I think it's incumbent upon us, and this needs to be part of that reform. We go through the police academy and we're graded on police stuff. And if you can pass that police stuff, then you're considered a good officer. But there's nothing there to prepare you for dealing with African Americans or any other race if you have never done that in your life. And we just naturally assume that this person has interacted with other cultures, but that's not the fact. That's not the fact at all. So it's up to us, starting in the police academy, to get these people, make sure, give them interaction with all cultures. They need to be graded on that too. If they can't pass that, they don't need to put a badge and a gun on. Because once you put them on that street, as a police chief, I'm at my house at night. They're out there patrolling, okay? We can't control what they're doing. We can only hope that they're doing the right things. We can only hope that their supervisor is holding them to doing the right things. But a lot of times, that's not the case.
Right. Well, definitely receive that, and that's an interesting statement there about, really things starting at the police academy when you talk about understanding various cultures. That's definitely a note there. The next question that I have, and this is for Derrick Johnson, and I want, and also Dwayne Crawford to kind of weigh in on this. We've been talking a lot about defunding our police departments. So what does that mean? Can you break that down so that the folks that are listening, and that's actually, one of the questions that we've got, help us understand, what does defunding the police department mean? We'll start with Brother Johnson.
Thank you for the question. So defund police, there is no working operational definition of that term that's nationalized. It means different things depending on the individual and the experience. So you take Ferguson. Ferguson, during the time of Mike Brown protests, had established a police agency that was predatory in nature. The goal was that police law enforcement agency was to generate revenues and fees to support the city. So they were very aggressive in pulling over the citizens and other pedestrians to levy fines against them. You take the scenario of Baltimore. Baltimore has had a persistent problem with policing in the past. A lot of that was a result of individuals who didn't live in the city of Baltimore. They lived outside of the city, so they were policing in communities they neither understood, care about, or were invested in. But you take the scenario of Minneapolis, a police force that has long been problematic. The police union had a strong grip on that agency. the police chief had to sue the agency for discriminatory practices, much of which was levied against him because of that police union. And you have other scenarios. And so when we look at law enforcement across the country, we have to understand the distinctive nature of law enforcement. And the slogan defund could mean many different things. There are a lot of agencies that have accelerated the police budget, and they did so by de-emphasizing budgets for the mental health facilities and support. They de-emphasized support for social workers, particularly for communities that were riveted with trauma and households that was riveted with trauma, transferring the relationship between the community and police in ways in which were more harmful to the communities, because police officers were being called on assignments to address issues that they were not trained for. They should not have never been called. That was the result of not having either social workers to address issues on the front end or mental health professionals to address issues on the front end. And you overlay that with a high chemical dependency, particularly for those who have mental health challenges. If you look at individuals or communities that have high chemical dependencies, oftentimes those are individuals who are trying to self-medicate. And when we defund the budget of mental health professionals and mental health facilities, you have people who are trying to self-medicate. And as a result of that, we've seen a steady increase in police budgets. And that money had to come from somewhere. And oftentimes it came from other agencies, which would have been more preventive in nature as opposed to predatory in our communities. And then you couple that with the lack of cultural sensitivity training that we see across the board, on top of renegade individuals who think they can go to the military, come, sign up law enforcement, never have any remediation for the post-traumatic stress syndromes that they're suffering from because they were in Afghanistan, now they are in our cities. Defund can mean many things based on the reality of where people live. And the other sad part of this, we all know we have these bad apple officers within our midst, within our agencies, but because of qualified immunity and because we lack a national database of these officers who go around and terrorize our communities, they're allowed to go agency to agency and create terror in our community. And we have many good law enforcement officers, but until we do away with qualified immunity, until we establish a national database so we can track this behavior, we're going to set ourselves up as an African-American community to continue to get the worst of the worst in ways in which we should not be receiving those individuals because it is our tax dollars. But we have the power, and elections have consequences, so we need to march to November. I'm going to stop there because I can go on a little longer, but I know we got a lot of people on this panel.
And keep aside, but I you know, very key things that you said there. Mr. Crawford, I want you to jump in there and share with us your thoughts about that.
Yeah, I'll be brief. I just want to add to what's been said, and let me just first applaud all of our panelists this evening. One part of the conversation I think needs to be also considered, we in law enforcement cannot be defensive when these kind of discussions are being held. As you've noticed, the issue of defunding police has become a very political thing. I've noticed now that our current president has had a number of commercials out on this. But let me just say this. Every one of our municipal public administrators should be doing an analysis on what is the return on investment from the tax-paying dollars that are being spent. We know that for various reasons, law enforcement in many cases has become a social safety net. So it's already been said, me as an administrator, I should be looking to say, if I've got issues with mental illness, substance abuse, homelessness, etc., who's most equipped to deliver the service to respond to those needs? Is it my public safety or my law enforcement agency, my police department, or is it another part of our community, our city, that should be handling these types of issues and these services? That to me is a fair conversation. And it should be, if I'm a private citizen, I should be wanting to understand from my public officials, how are we addressing these social service needs? It may be, and it's already been said, there's approximately 18,000 law enforcement. There could be agencies who are not equipped to deliver those social services. And it may be that some of their dollars need to go where? To other agencies in that community that are more equipped to do that. There could be other communities where the police department is most equipped. But I would say this, If we're not asking these tough questions of how is our taxpaying dollars being spent, who's most equipped to deliver those services, and are we as a society getting our return on our investment, that's an important conversation to have. But I'll also say this, it may be we need to fund both. It could be in some communities you need to fund what? Your law enforcement agency at similar levels as you need to support your social services area. But I do think it's going to be a city by city, community by community discussion. Now I'll say this, we shouldn't get to okie doke here and get caught into this political thing here. You got approximately 18,000 agencies. I don't see us taking budget money and removing 18,000 agencies. But I do think we as citizens should be having these conversations with our elected officials. I'm also say this, why are we not discussing what our mayors, our city council, our city managers are doing? They're the ones that are making these decisions. Isn't the police chief?
Yeah, I mean, before we move on to the next question, I think you're absolutely right. And I think one of the takeaways here, and I hope our listeners are hearing this, is that when we talk about defunding the police, I mean, this isn't a national issue. This is a community by community issue. Because you have some police agencies that are operating just fine. Some communities around the country, and then you have some that may need that engagement. So so the takeaway I'm hearing from this is, you have to be engaged in your community. You have to be engaged in what your mayors are doing. I used to tell my citizens all the time when I was the mayor, I have more power over you than the president does at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. And that's real talk. And so when they got that and they understood that, and that's how we were able to make some changes. So how do we continue?
But let me jump in here. It may be an agency by agency, but we need some federal standards.
I agree.
I agree. Federal standards, absolutely. And that's
I agree.
Right? If the leadership in Washington, D.C. isn't saying that this is something that communities across the country should be observing or should be considering or should be doing, then it makes it an easy scapegoat for many communities to not get involved with it at all. And so you're absolutely right.
I agree.
How do you elevate this conversation even more? I'd love to hear from Sora Gordon. How do you elevate this conversation even more as we move forward? I'd love to hear from Brother Collins and also Brother Baisley on this. How do we elevate this conversation even more with our organizations and with our community?
So thank you for that question. It is my belief that we have to have the conversations not when they're just comfortable. When we're amongst our peers, people who are together seem to have some similarities. We seem to think alike in nature, particularly if you're in certain organizations or if you're in certain fields or if you're in certain residents or certain communities. But what we have to do to get some change is that, number one, we have to have some of us running for these positions. I don't believe there's any way possible where we can infiltrate and find any clear way to make sure that we're at the table more than us being at the table. Like, you can't have it both ways. So you have the African-American community or Black and brown people saying that we're disenfranchised, and we are. But until some of us step up and decide we're going to run for these offices, we're going to get in law enforcement, that's the only way really to take our needs out of the hands of somebody else. We have to take responsibility for ourselves. Just a little bit of, I dissent just a little bit with the prior question, because I believe a lot of times it is definitely volitional and you can't teach character. If you don't have any character, I don't care how many hard skills you have. I don't care if you can shoot a bullseye from here to however far away. But character and certain biases people have within them, and it's not going to matter how you train them. I think sometimes we fall on the excuse in many ways saying, well, they just don't know. But that's never really good enough for our children, right? Ignorance is never an excuse. I don't think we need to give them that excuse. Some of them absolutely know. When we talk about the officers who have gone from agency to agency with a file or a record of these biases or mistreating or stopping children, and it's there, or they go on administrative leave here and then they go 30 miles up the highway and get hired. Those are volitional things, and we don't need to confuse the two. So if you have a propensity for being discriminatory and acting like that, you don't need to be in the field, period. If welcome to Walmart works better for you, that's where you need to go. We need to quit letting people have excuses, and some of us need to get at the table. We need to have some of us making the decisions, like some of these men here today. We need to have some of us as police chief. We need to have the good of us representing all of us. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. I hope y'all heard that. I hope y'all all heard that. Brother Collins.
I agree with Sora Gordon on that issue about one, having some men of like mind and goodwill running for elected office who can make decisions about budgets. When I live in a city where we spend 38% of our budget on policing and another 24% on fire. So that leaves about 32% for all of the other divisions to carry out the daily work of our community. And that's just unheard of. And so when you spend that much money, something is going to fall through the cracks. I also think that Brother Crawford, what he mentioned relative to law enforcement, we getting what we pay for. If we're not getting reduction in crime or activities in communities with law enforcement and police actively engaging in communities of color, then we're not getting the money or our bang for our buck. And so I think that those are some of the things that when people get in elected office on the local level, like you, Brother Ray, then therefore you get to see the change that we're looking for. The other piece to this is the fraternity needs to continue this dialogue, not November 3rd. So when we march to the polls on November 3rd, and whoever is the elected president, then on November 4th, we need to have some more discussions. Because whoever gets elected to go in 16th Pennsylvania Avenue, we got to have the same kind of discussions then that we're having now. That's how I see it.
All right, Dr. Baisley.
All right, and I'm gonna, in a sense, echo my colleagues here. They say an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And we need to be keeping an eye on things before the problem goes down, because being reactive is always an extreme. But if you're at the table, as was said earlier, before the incident happened, in Phi Beta Sigma, we have Sigma Day on Capitol Hill, Sigma Day on State Capitol, and it should be Sigma Day at City Hall, the Planning Commission, the Police Commission, and every other agency, because that's where the decisions are made. They say all politics are local, and I'm a believer in that. We can change who's in the White House, who's in the Senate, and so forth, and we can move laws around, but the politics are local. And if you're at your meetings, I live in an area that has a housing association, and that thing is packed, and those people really value it, and they demand what they want in their community, and generally they get it. Nobody wants to go on their Saturday and sit the whole morning in a housing meeting, but it's the work we have to do. So the work right here is very important, but the work needs to be spread out, so every agency needs to be on guard, not, as the brother said, not just before November 3rd, but after November 3rd, and for all 4 years. And no matter who it is, because we need to hold everybody accountable. We can't take in good faith anybody, no matter if they align with us or not. We have to make sure and keep those who are elected accountable to what we elected them for. But I say do the work up front, and then that'll mitigate some of the need for this this trying to rectify things after the event.
Thank you. So I'm going to go to Dane and Brother Barnes next on the question, but I want the police chiefs, I'm going to tee up something for you, and I want you to think about this as we move around. You know, one of the questions that we had that just came in was, you know, do African-American police officers have trouble interacting with Caucasian individuals? So I want to get some responses on that. And then also, you know, folks want to have some discussions on suggestions for recruiting and hiring Black officers to work in their communities that they live in. So that just came in, so I want you guys to think about that. But for Dane and for Brother Dane and Brother Barnes, you know, especially you, Dane, you know, you're the collegiate representative on our national board. So you hear the voices of a lot of young brothers from across the country, and I know that Brother Barnes, as well as you interact with a lot of our collegiates and having young children yourself. What are you hearing out there? You know, what is the mood? What are you hearing? And is there a true sense of folks wanting to get involved, or is it just, you know what, nothing's going to happen again? It's just same old, same old. And we'll start with you, Brother Norville.
Great question. The Brotherhood is crying for a change, and besides the Brotherhood, people in general are crying for a change. You know, people are sick and tired. I'm pretty sure everybody's heard of this, but people are sick and tired of being sick and tired. And just to throw a couple of facts at you, you know, since 2013, Black people have been 28% of the people killed by law enforcement officers, despite being only 13% of the population. If you break down police killings per 1 million people, you will find that Black people are 3 times more likely to be killed by police than white people, but are 1.3 times more likely to be unarmed compared to them. 1 in 3 Black men and 1 in 18 Black women face a likelihood of lifetime imprisonment, where white men face a 1 in 17 chance and white women face a 1 in 111 chance of the same sentence. When you look at these numbers, you know, people are fed up. They're tired, and the Brotherhood is mimicking that.
Brother Barnes, what are you hearing out there?
These are interesting times, and they're different than what we had. I'm not a young guy. I've got children that are young, but what I see, and maybe it's a result of living in a social media age where everyone can communicate instantly. We live in an era where there's a heightened sensitivity to police brutality. We're living in a time where people have to be still because of coronavirus. But this time, I do believe it's different. I also have the advantage of kind of a lot of work in the continent, and I see that the movement and the focus is not just an American focus; it's kind of a global focus. And again, maybe that's because of the communication that we have, and because people are having to be quiet, and people are kind of stuck, having to, you know, have the time and they have the space to kind of think about things. But I think generally people want a different world. And that's what I was saying before. I think this is a different kind of opportunity. Now, we've seen intense moments before. We've seen it with mass shootings. We've seen it with other situations. For some reason, in some way, somehow, I think now is a little bit.
So I want to get back to our chiefs on those questions that we asked, but I'm going to tee up some questions for Sora Gordon and for Mr. Johnson. You know, what are the conversations that parents should be having with their kids when they encounter the police? I think that's and I think that's one of the, I think that's on the minds of a lot of individuals who are out there. So you guys think through that as we get prepared. So I want to hear from the chiefs. Do we have African Americans that are African American officers that have trouble interacting with Caucasian individuals? Have you ever experienced that? And then also, what are some recruiting suggestions that you could share with the folks that are listening tonight to say, hey, let them go back to their communities and say, you need to get involved as an officer in your own community. And we'll start with you, Chief Drain, and then Chief Moore, and then Chief Ballard. I spared you, Chief Ballard. I spared you the first go around. And of course, I was going to wrap up with Chief Nichols. So, Chief Drain.
Yeah, in the time that I've been in law enforcement, I haven't really experienced many African American officers having trouble with white residents. The city I live in is pretty diverse. It's pretty well high education level. City, we only have 8 African American. Our population is about 8% African American. Yet we have a black mayor. We have a black police chief. And so in a city like ours, I have not experienced that. Regarding recruiting, I think one of the things that would help with recruiting more African Americans, we actually have a college degree requirement in my police department. You have to have a 4-year degree unless you are a military veteran or unless you've worked at another law enforcement. In that case, you need to have 60 college hours. You don't have to, you have to from an accredited university. And one of the things that we have found, and we're also what's called an accredited police department. We're accredited by something called CALEA, the Commission on Accreditation of Law Enforcement Agencies, the highest accreditation body in law enforcement, over 400 standards. So what we have found is that when we are going to colleges, we're going to military bases, the smart kids that have researched that those types of things about very professional agencies, they come our way. I think in the African American community, a lot of people see law enforcement as blue collar work. When we show them the salary, when we show them the diversity of work that they can do in this profession, we are able to recruit African Americans. We're at about 8%, 9%, right in line with our population of our city, but we have African American officers from all over the country that work in our police department because they hear about our agency and they want to come to our agency because we set high standards. So I believe raising the bar in this profession will help with recruiting more minorities and more African Americans into this profession.
Chief Moore.
Yeah, so specifically, I have seen over the course of my career, individual officers of all race and ethnicities have differences and have difficulties with individuals. Sometimes it's interracial, and sometimes it's not. In all instances, it's been about at times individuals that weren't suited for this profession, and other individuals that needed additional training, additional guidance, and frankly accountability. They needed to know that there were limits, and that those limits and that this is a privilege to wear this badge and to carry about the duties of a police officer. That this is a function of service. So I don't think it's. I think the biases that exist in America go across all communities. I've seen this with and over the course of time, I've seen the evolution of policing. And we look at the LGBTQ community, for instance, in policing. And over the last 20 years, the evolution and what was explicit and vile expressions of discrimination and misuse of police authority, and how that has changed. So I do think that I understand the nature of the question, which is, or I could interpret or anticipate the nature of the question is a person, a young black man, does he still have the potential or the likelihood of expressing a bias against a Caucasian male to the same degree that a perception of a white male involving a stop involving a black male? We have in the city, we have implicit bias, but we also have racial profiling allegations. We investigate that. We track very closely the ethnicity of the involved officers, as well as the complainants. And I've seen black officers that have been accused of racial profiling, as well as I've seen white and Hispanic and Asian officers. And vice versa, I've seen officers of all backgrounds accused involving Asian and involving Hispanic. So I think that for law enforcement, for me, I think we need, at this time in space, we need to focus on the black community and its relationship with policing. But as police professionals, we have this challenge because we deal with humans and we deal with people. And we deal with people who come to this profession with biases, and then they work in a society that has systemic racism that's reinforced in a number of different venues. Lastly, in regards to communication, Los Angeles Police Department is hiring. We have been focusing these last few years on increasing our representation of black men and particularly black women. This is also a field that is too dominant by males. It's a field that will benefit. Right now, we're just under 20%. We're about 19% of our sworn workforce is made up of women. I've seen over my course of my lifetime that improved tremendously. But our desire and our goal, stated goal for this last year, has been that half of our academy classes will be made up of women, and that 20% of our academy classes are made up of black ethnicity. Our department is made up of just over 9% of our rank and file are African American men and women. And our census data in the city is about 9%, maybe a little lower than that, of an African American community. But in our most troubled relationships is in the African American community. And so if there's a place I'm going to overclock and I want to overfocus, is I want to dig into and have effectively attract young black men and women to this profession. We've been proving successful with that in targeted outreach and marketing. Not only through the historic black universities and colleges, but by local and pulling from local zip codes, young men and women that may not be aware of what law enforcement is as a profession, as far as it's a good paying job, it's a job of service, it's an honorable profession. There's a lot of negative information out there right now, but I've got academy classes that are still attracting applicants each month, and I'm hopeful that this group, what I really would ask from all of you is, some of you probably have sons and daughters and maybe some grandsons and daughters as I look around here, but others may have brothers or sisters that would benefit by either from this Los Angeles area or traveling here. We're hiring and we need you.
Well, let me make sure I put out there that you can send that notice to our Phi Beta Sigma so that we can post that with our membership and make sure that we get that out there. And Chief Ballard.
Thank you, Brother Ray. First, to reiterate, I'm blessed to take over an agency from Chief Nichols that was CALEA. And for the members of Phi Beta Sigma, they need to know that CALEA could be very much a silver bullet that we're looking for to address a lot of the issues in law enforcement. I only had the pleasure to have a budget like the LAPD and some of the bigger cities that are able to handle marketing research and do what they need to do to bring in recruitment and retention. But CALEA asks and demands that we have a recruiting strategy for minorities. Now, this is important. Despite the fact that I am a nationally accredited organization, I'm a chief of a nationally accredited organization, I have absolutely no financial incentive to do so. I've got agencies in the surrounding area that could care less about their use of force. There are constant news stories for disasters of things to go wrong. And yet here I am nationally accredited trying to do everything I can, but pay-wise have to compete with them. And make no mistake about it. We believe in the standards, we believe in accountability, and that's what CALEA demands. But I am competing against fast food restaurants for employees. And that is a huge issue within most of law enforcement. We need a way, a mechanical way of nationalizing a recommendation for agencies that make the commitment to become nationally accredited. And part of that process, to go back to answer the question with African-American issues with Caucasians, because of national accreditation, they demand that officers continually train upon cultural diversity, and they mandate this training. The use of force is critically evaluated to where it's audited. It's sent off to use of force experts that make recommendations upon training, upon equipment, that flag if we have issues. It demands early warning systems. So a lot of the protocols that law enforcement needs are found within CALEA, but how do we motivate chiefs and mayors and city councils to say, hey, you know what? Not only are you state accredited, but you're nationally accredited, and let's separate you from those agencies who could care less. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Chief, for that. And so,
Hey, Brother Ray, just real quick on what on the comment that he made. It came up earlier. I think Mr. Crawford brought up the point that we had 18,000 law enforcement agencies in the United States. What Chief Ballard is talking about is really important. All 18,000 of those law enforcement agencies, they report to their governing body. They report to their city council, to their township, to their state. So when we talk about police reform, there is no overarching national body that can do that. There's no way to do that right now. The federal government can use their ability to hold up grants and do some of those things to maybe try to force more agencies to become CALEA. And becoming CALEA accredited is not an easy process. Everybody may not be able to reach that standard, but we may need something similar to that. Maybe we don't need 400 standards, but we need 200 standards that everybody's got to have, or you're not eligible to apply for grants, is one reform thing I think that we should have.
Thank you for that. And again, the key takeaway here that I hope that our folks that are tuning in, that are listening, it's ask the question, what is your police department accredited? Just one of those simple questions you can ask your city councilman or your mayor. Is your police department accredited? And I wanted to bring in Chief Nichols on this, but Chief, I think that is important. I want to bring you in on the other question and let you, tie this up. When I asking, what are the conversations that parents should have with their children who encounter the police? What are the conversations they should have? And I want to bring in Sora Gordon on this. I want to make sure that her perspective, being a mother of a 16-year-old, what is that conversation that you're having? I want to bring in Derek Johnson on this, and then Chief Nichols, I want you to close it out with that.
Thank you, Brother Ray. So just to set a pictorial of my son, I have one child. He's 16, but he's also 6'3". So he's probably taller than most adult men. He plays football at the high school, so he's not a small kid, but he's very athletic. But he is the 16 at heart. He's your video kid. You know, he plays with the cat. He does everything a 16-year-old may do. He talks on his phone. So it's not abnormal for him to walk down the street with a hoodie and with his Beats on and eating candy and playing with his phone and not paying attention. All are, you know, to me, what a normal or what the average 16-year-old does. So when my son goes out the house, and I was recently reminded with the recent incidents that happened, it's always, Jameson, what time do I need to pick you up? Because I have found that I'm his personal Uber if my husband, you know, cannot get home. Is there practice today? Do you have your homework? Do you have your money? And now I've added, son, always be looking out. Be respectful. If you're with your friends, because he's often the minority, remember, you can't do what they do. Remember, and he'll say, Mom, I know. Remember that I'm Black. Remember that I'm 6'3". Remember who, and it's like clockwork. And I feel bad on one hand that my son has to regurgitate these things back to me, but I would be remiss as a parent if I did not remind him. He's often says, well, Mom, they're good friends because he has mixed friends. I live in a very diverse neighborhood, but we're trying to get him to understand that should the police come and should they think something's going on, you can't run. They may be able to run. You're going to stand out. You are 6'3". You can't get mistaken for an adult. So I tell him, when you walk into a building, take off your hat, take off your hoodie. You know, never mind that it's raining. And these are all questions. These kids are very inquisitive. They're not like, I'm a Gen Xer and you just never really questioned your parent, but my son would be like, but why? You know, but why? So he really doesn't really understand until he's recently watched a lot of the events with my husband and I. So now he's starting to understand that, yes, we have done what we're supposed to do. We've done things the right way. We've gone to college. We're teaching our kids. We live in a diverse neighborhood. We are working, you know. However, you know, that's not always good enough. I tell him, if you get stopped, be quiet, because my son is going to ask a question. My job is to ask the question. Your job is to make a home safe. And it's kind of scary. He's at the age now where he's driving. So he has a car and I'm like, I want you to be independent. I want you to drive so I don't have to be the jitney, but I'm afraid for you to do that. So if they ask you to pull over, put your hands on the wheel. It's like going through this whole semantic, and it's very emotional for me as a mother, because I'm telling him this, I'm hoping that he hears me and that he will oblige, but I know even that's not good enough. So when my son leaves the house, I'm literally afraid and praying, and I cannot sleep until my son returns back to my house. So that's an everyday conversation in my household. It will likely be, because he's still growing, and he'll, like my husband is 6'5". He'll likely be 6'7", 6'8". I'll be doing this until I leave here, because there is no rest. It is a very unresting season, and I don't care how far we get as a Black mother of a Black kid, who I know will say, well, why? You know, because he does it to me. He does it to his dad. It's a very fearful thing for me, but that's a day in the life of a Black mother.
Brother Johnson.
There's not much more you can add to that. It's a legacy thing that we've all grown up with, that we had to be told. We're telling our kids. But I want to get back to what we can do, because we don't need to go to what we know we have to do, but what we can do. Mayors are elected, they appoint police chiefs. In some areas, police chiefs are elected. County sheriffs are elected in most cases. All of this are driven by our tax dollars. It is refreshing to hear a police department that set a high standard, but unfortunately, because the tax base is where we live, they don't have the resources, or the standards are not the same. We have to change the culture of policing in our communities, and we have to advocate for a national standard that create a level of uniformity across the board. We have police officers who can go agency to agency. And if we can't do it federally, how do we get police unions to pay more attention to, if they truly care about the profession, how do they weed out the bad apples as opposed to protect the bad apples? Some of the worst things that I've seen in these scenarios is how police unions negotiate protection for bad officers in the union contract. And built into that contract, it protects individuals who put a black eye on the whole profession. But the best thing the law enforcement community can do is actually move away from those bad apples and purge themselves from that. If an individual comes and they serve our country, that's a beautiful thing. But if that individual is in combat, what type of remediation are we providing to that individual for their mental health needs? Because when they go into certain scenarios, do they have a flashback as if they're in Afghanistan or in Syria when they just in someone's home? Those are real questions. In many scenarios, particularly in the rural South, you have police officers who were small in school, picked on, but now they're big buff because they're abusing steroids. There's a such thing called steroid rage. Police officers are not drug tests. And it's not for cocaine and heroin, it's for steroids. That's a problem. No one talks about that. We have to change the view of policing from top to bottom because we have some really good law enforcement agencies. We have some really good law enforcement officers, but we have some bad ones as well. And all of the biases of society are also living within law enforcement agencies. And as a result of that, all three of my sons are in danger. But should I put all the responsibility on my three sons, or should we be fighting as a community to change the nature, the culture of policing, because the nature and culture of policing are all funded by our tax dollars?
Chief Nichols, what's the conversation that parents should be having with their kids when they encounter the police?
It's funny you brought that up, Brother First Vice. When I was chief of police, I made a brochure on how to interact with the police on a traffic stop. Just simple things like, no sudden moves, make sure that you have your hands on the wheel, things like that. Things that we shouldn't have to do. A black person or anybody shouldn't have to do. It shouldn't matter if your child is 6'5". It shouldn't matter. Everybody should get treated the same, and everybody should get treated fair. When I was police chief, it has to come down from the top. It has to come from that police chief and filter it way down. When I was police chief, an officer on a traffic stop was not allowed to ask a person where they're going or where they're coming from. That's not why you stop them, because based off where they're coming from. Whatever you stop them for, you deal with that. You don't need to be asking where they're coming from. It has to come from the administrators. And unfortunately, when you get to a department where that's strictly enforced, like it is at Starkville PD, and Chief Ballard is going to carry on that, you get officers that get mad and leave, because every agency, well, I say the majority of agencies, have a shortage of police officers. That's why the bad police officers keep going from agency to agency, because if they're certified, we're going to save money, and we're going to hire them based off the fact that they're certified. Okay? We're not going to do much of a background check. He's certified. He worked for this agency. And normally when you call that agency and ask them about that person, they're going to give you a good reference of that person, to get rid of them a lot of times. So it has to come down from the administration. It has to be a mindset of, this is what not going to be tolerated. It's not going to be tolerated. Okay? But yeah, we at Starkville PD, every year I brought in someone to teach sensitivity training, and we talked about exactly what we're talking about now. Okay, I started this about 3 or 4 years ago because I knew this was coming. I knew this day was coming. So we tried to prepare ourselves for it. There's no way to prepare yourself for it when you are an individual agency. Okay, Starkville Police Department is individual agency that's CALEA certified. What can we do about the officers that coming in, of officers that leave, that we run off? So it has to come down from the federal government, the reform on how you should treat and interact with people.
So let me, and we're reaching the closing point here, and there's so many questions that we have, and I know that we can't get to them all, but I want to bring in Mr. Crawford. I want to kind of put a bow on this, and hopefully Derek Johnson and our national second vice. I want to kind of close out with when we talk about and Brother Kennedy Barnes. So when we talk about the George Floyd Justice Policing Act that was just passed, legislation that was passed at the federal level, just want some brief insights on that. What can the men of Phi Beta Sigma do? As our lawmakers are wading through this process. And I want to hear from you, Mr. Crawford. I want to hear from you, Mr. Johnson. Definitely our legal counsel, and then we're going to wrap it up with our national president, who is now on the line to give us some closing remarks, because we want to be respectful of everyone's time. But thank you all for that. Go, Mr. Crawford.
Yeah, we at Noble fully support the Justice and Policing Act. Fully support it. And I won't get all the details, running out of time, but this is the only bill. It's not a perfect bill, but it talks about enforcing national standards. Whether it's how we train our officers, whether it's how we have accreditation for our agencies, been talked about, whether it's about the issue of data collection, whether it be use of force, misconduct. There are a number of things in this bill we fully, even around qualified immunity. All these things we're talking about are going to require the federal government. The problem is, and what your fraternity can help us, we have got to make it unacceptable for this Congress not to act. Now, do I think the Justice and Policing Bill Act will all get passed in a compromise in its full form? Probably not. But right now, everyone, there is no national standards whatsoever that govern law enforcement. That's got to stop.
Mr. Johnson.
It is a bill that has passed the House. That's a great thing.
Yep.
It is stuck in the Senate. The members of Phi Beta Sigma, if you have relationships in the Senate, particularly on the Republican side of the aisle, place a call. We have to depoliticize the nature of policing. Bills pass because of relationships. Senator Scott is handling the bill. If he is a friend of any of the members, give him a call, give him a nudge. If you live in a state that have a member who's a Republican, give them a call. Get them to understand the nature of the importance of this bill. NAACP was established in 1909 because of a race right, where a group of blacks who had met the year before met up with a group of whites. And they decided that we can not have a true democracy if mob violence continued to exist. Springfield, Illinois race riots, where local law enforcement agencies across the country during this times were participating in lynching. They were participating in public disgracing of African Americans, resulting in killing. But the group of whites and blacks realized, we cannot have a true democracy if we allow this to take place. We cannot have a true democracy if those who are sworn to duty to protect and serve are given the ability to be predators in our neighborhoods without any accountability. That's a conversation we got to have with the members in the U.S. Senate on the Republican side. And if we can do that, we could save a lot of young black men and unfortunately a lot of young black women lives. But if we can't do that, November is the real reality. And most important, we need to move from protest to power. Power is in November, and from power to policy. We get the right people elected so we can get the type of policy that's necessary so we can enjoy the quality of life that we are entitled to.
Attorney Barnes.
I agree and would reiterate what the other two gentlemen said. And I think with regard to the Senate, I think there's a willingness among members of the Senate, but they are going to lockstep behind Leader McConnell. They're going to lockstep behind the president. But I think we can focus, in addition to our personal relationships, focus on Tim Scott. Tim Scott, in prior conversations and some of his writings and what he was originally trying to push, he understands, but he has to have the courage and he has to be willing to step up because he's got leverage. If Tim Scott comes out and says, we've got to do away with chokeholds, it can't be studied, it needs to be gone, he takes that position publicly, Republicans have got to get behind him. Mitch McConnell's got to get behind him. Donald Trump is likely to get behind him because nobody really knows what Trump really cares about other than himself. He doesn't have any really strong positions on this stuff. He's going to go with wherever the wind tells him to go. So I would focus on Tim Scott, whether you know him or not. Appeal to him as a Black man who has been through some of this stuff, and maybe it works. If it doesn't, get ready in November. Let's do it all again. We just can't let it go.
Thank you so much for that. And look, let me just say to all of you, thank you so much for your insight tonight. Thank you for your words. I wish that I could get to all of you. We have so many questions in the queue, and I hope that we can get some of them answered. We're going to send them out to you guys, and hopefully you'll answer some of them and send them back to us so that we can share this with our folks. But the takeaways that I heard tonight from many of you was the importance of making sure that you as an individual get involved with your local community, that you understand the powers of your local folks and what they do when it comes to your police officers and your police departments. I heard about the importance of accreditation. I thought that was a phenomenal statement that was made today. Is my department accredited? And I think that was a great takeaway. Also, the importance of the power of making sure that we are getting involved at the federal level, at our state level, and making sure that we are engaged, making those phone calls, reaching out to the relationships that we may have with elected officials, and understanding the importance of that. I heard the passionate stories from our folks who opened us up today. I thank the chiefs for your openness and your honesty and sharing what your department is looking like, and admitting to some of the challenges that you have had in the past, and recognizing that in this time in history we're moving to that next level, and that it means that there's a different kind of engagement that needs to happen, and recognizing that truly that everyone should be treated the same. And that a mom who has a 6'3" son, shouldn't be concerned about him going out of the home and being mistaken for a grown man. Because why? Because police officers are treating everyone the same, and we're receiving that. I want to take an opportunity to introduce our international president, Michael Crystal, who has been at the forefront of making sure that not only that we continue these conversations with our organization throughout this COVID period, which we have just seen amazing engagement with our brotherhood, but it's truly committed to us as an organization staying on the front lines of justice, of reform, and dealing with these challenges that we're facing in our communities. And so with that, I introduce Michael Crystal, International President of Phi Beta Sigma.
Thank you, Chris. It was 1934 when Phi Beta Sigma started our social action program. And it was started off building on our motto, culture for service and service for humanity. It was August of 1963, 1 month before I was born, when Phi Beta Sigma played a major role in the March on Washington, with two of our fraternity brothers, A. Philip Randolph and the Honorable John Lewis, played a key role and speaking role within that event. As an African-American male, I had two experiences dealing with the police. It was in 1991 when I was driving my brother's Jeep Cherokee. And I noticed as I was driving home, someone was following me. And I told my sister, if a car comes behind me on this street, I know we're being followed. Police comes up behind me and they tell me they were following me because many Jeep Cherokees had been stolen. Fast forward 10 years later, 2001, I'm growing in my career. Marty and I decide we want to build a house out in a suburb in Memphis. We do that. I'm jumping in my truck, and I'm going up to the local convenience store to buy a newspaper. As I'm driving out of my neighborhood and about to get to the stop sign, a police car speeds up behind me, all lights on, blue lights everywhere. Comes up to me, he asks me, and I quote, "Why are you out in this neighborhood?" And I say to him, "I have a house right up the street." And I ask him, I say, "Why did you stop me?" And he says to me, It's a new development, a lot of houses being built, almost as we remember Ahmaud Arbery. He says, we've had a lot of equipment stolen from out here. And I say, is anything in the back of my truck that's been stolen? And there's nothing there. Phi Beta Sigma, in collaboration with Noble, real reform, people, a lot of discussion tonight from people, policies, I'll close with that, and policing. Very proud of the partnership and the MOU that we have with NAACP and with Derek Johnson. So thankful to have him here. Very excited and proud of the partnership that we have with Noble and with Dwayne Crawford. And to the chiefs here tonight, what a great reflection from the largest, or one of the largest within the country, Chief Michael Moore, to her brother Ed Drain, and certainly to Mark Ballard, small time city, Starkville, Mississippi, my home of my alma mater, Mississippi State University. But so proud to have you here having robust discussion and honest discussion and frank discussion on real issues that we saw were opportunities, but more importantly, some honest solutions. A huge thanks to our Sora, Madam First Vice, who really held her own as the only female panelist, but more importantly, really highlighted the real reflection of what a mother has to think about when their sons leave home, because her greatest desire is for her son to come back home. You know, as a brotherhood of conscious men actively serving our communities, you know, we've participated in social unrest. We were there when Eric Garner screamed, "I can't breathe." We were there when Michael Brown experienced his death in Ferguson, but more importantly, we stayed in Ferguson. When we saw social unrest and we saw that the city took a tremendous downturn with a lot of flames, it was Phi Beta Sigma who adopted a business, Juanita's Fashion, donated over $25,000 to it, and was able to see that business prosper post the Ferguson experience. We joined with our fellow D9 fraternity presidents, and we spoke loud and spoke very clear with the death of Ahmaud Arbery. And the biggest thing we asked was that those 3 people who killed Mr. Arbery be brought up on charges. And we all witnessed 8 minutes and 46 seconds of the death of Mr. George Floyd. And when we think about Mr. Floyd's death, we know that throughout the history, particularly within our community, we were one of the first to step up. That would be the African American community. But Mr. Floyd's death was a tipping point. And with that tipping point, we saw the entire world stand up. And as we witnessed the entire world stand up, Phi Beta Sigma knew it was something that we needed to do as well. And that was the birth of our initiative centered around Enough is Enough. It was us having an opportunity to partner with my good friend Derek Johnson and the NAACP in their aggressive campaign of "We are done dying." And lastly, we recognized that we had to move beyond protests, but more importantly, we had to move towards legislating. And you've already touched on it. I thought Brother Barnes did a great job. Derek Johnson did a great job. Right now, within the halls of Congress, we know that there are some pieces of legislation that was introduced. It was a piece introduced in the House, and there was a piece that was introduced in the Senate. As we think about the reflection of this panel tonight, great discussion, a lot of solutions being offered up. But here's where Phi Beta Sigma stands. Phi Beta Sigma believes that as we move from protests and move towards legislating, and specifically when we think about this particular issue, we have defined some frameworks of what we like to see within police reform. And the framework really falls in 3 key categories. Number 1, we believe, as we heard the chief say tonight, that police need to be held accountable and with some standards being put in place. Number 2, we've got to address the high propensity of the chokehold being used at a disproportionate rate of African American men. And the third one, we must address cultural bias within the police department. As we think about moving from protesting, November voting, and new Congress being in place in 2021, one of the things Phi Beta Sigma is going to be working towards is challenging that congressional body, the new resident, whether it's the second term of the Trump presidency or the first term of the Biden presidency. We're going to be challenging both entities to work in collaboration with us as we move towards the centerpiece of some police reform legislation, having those three components. And so as we close tonight, I'm super excited, Brother Ray, of the great job you did on moderating. What a robust panel with a body of people who, in most cases, the biggest thing they do is talk amongst a large crowd, and I thought you did a fantastic job on leading that. To the brothers and to the public who attended, I'm thankful for you participating in this very timely conversation. Within our community, we've witnessed this many, many, many times. And that's why for us, enough is enough. I bid you a great night. I thank you for participating, and I wish you a great rest of the week. Thank you, and have a blessed one.